It was one of those nights where everything seemed to go wrong. Clock on the wall ticked away, each second a reminder of the growing pile of tasks that kept me chained to my desk. Outside, the storm raged on, rain slamming against the windows with a ferocity that matched my frustration. I glanced at the clock again. 10:30 p.m. I should have been home hours ago. The workload had other plans. The soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound inside the office, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of the storm outside. I sighed, rubbing my tired eyes, and checked my phone. A notification from the traffic app flashed across the screen. A major accident on the bridge I cross daily. It was completely blocked, with no sign of clearing up anytime soon. Fantastic. Just what I needed. I opened the GPS app, hoping for a miracle, and it offered me an alternate route. Dirt road that cut through a dense, dark forest. The app claimed it was the quickest way home, and given the circumstances, I didn't have much choice. Grabbing my things, I braved the downpour and dashed to my car. The drive started out uneventful enough, though the heavy rain made visibility a challenge. The further I drove, the more unfamiliar the surroundings became. Trees loomed on either side of the narrow road, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out from the darkness. The GPS guided me deeper into the forest, the path becoming rougher with every passing mile. A sense of unease settled over me as I realized how isolated this route was. I hadn't seen another car since I left the main road, and the oppressive darkness seemed to swallow the light from my headlights. The rain was relentless, constant, deafening roar on the roof of my car. I tried to shake off the growing sense of dread, focusing instead on getting home. But something about the dense forest and the unending rain felt wrong, as if the night itself was watching, waiting. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I pressed on, the GPS's voice the only thing keeping me company. Little did I know, this night was far from over, and the horrors that awaited me on that dark, deserted road were only just beginning. The rain seemed to intensify as I continued down the dirt road, the rhythmic drumming on the roof now a cacophony that matched my rising anxiety. My GPS insisted this was the quickest route home. The deeper I ventured, the more I regretted trusting it. The road was narrow and winding, bordered by dense, ancient trees that seemed to close in on me with every turn. Every so often, my headlights would catch a glimpse of something moving in the underbrush. Flicker of motion that vanished the moment I tried to focus on it. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a stark reminder of how isolated I was out here. There were no streetlights, no signs of civilization. Just me, my car, and the endless forest. I tried to calm myself, reminding myself that it was just a shortcut, detour, but the feeling of being watched was growing stronger, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck that refused to go away. The darkness outside seemed almost alive, pressing in on the feeble glow of my headlights. I could feel the weight of the night bearing down on me, suffocating and relentless. The road grew rougher, filled with potholes and treacherous patches of mud that threatened to pull my car into the forest. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white with tension. The GPS voice droned on, indifferent to the terror creeping into my mind. It was just a machine, oblivious to the fear that was slowly consuming me. Then, without warning, my car began to sputter. Engine coughed and wheezed, and my heart sank as the dashboard lights flickered ominously. I prayed silently, willing the car to keep going, but it was no use. With one final, shuddering gasp, the engine died. I was plunged into a silence that was almost deafening. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The rain pounded on the roof, a relentless drumbeat that echoed my rising panic. I tried the ignition again, but the engine refused to turn over. Desperation clawed at me as I fumbled for my phone, hoping for a signal, a lifeline. But there was nothing. No bars, no internet. Just the mocking emptiness of a dead zone. I was alone, trapped in the heart of the forest with no way to call for help. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. Outside, the darkness seemed to pulse and breathe, alive with unseen eyes watching my every move. I had no choice. I had to get out of the car and find help. But as I reached for the door handle, a new fear gripped me. What if something was out there, waiting? The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. The rain pounded harder, as if urging me to make a decision. I took a deep breath and steeled myself. Whatever was out there, I couldn't stay in the car. I had to move, had to do something. With a trembling hand, I pulled the handle. The door wouldn't budge. Panic flared again as I tried the other doors, but they were all stuck, locked by some unseen force. I was trapped. Desperation turned to terror, and I pounded on the windows, screaming for help that I knew would never come. Then, as if the night itself had heard my cries, something changed. A deep, unnatural silence fell over the forest, muting even the sound of the rain. And then, through the darkness, I saw it. Crimson stream trickling down the windshield, thick and viscous. It was blood. I stared in horror as it spread, coating the glass and blocking out the last remnants of light. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. But there was no logic, no explanation, just pure, unadulterated fear. And then through the crimson veil I heard it. A laugh, cold and cruel, echoing through the car and seeping into my very bones. It was the sound of madness, of something not quite human. I was no longer alone. The laughter reverberated through the car, chilling, inhuman sound that twisted my insides with dread. My breath came in ragged gasps as I sat frozen, eyes wide with terror, staring at the blood that now coated the windows. It was as if the darkness outside had seeped into the car, turning it into a claustrophobic coffin. I frantically tried the ignition again, hoping against hope that the engine would roar to life. But it remained silent, the dashboard lights mocking me with their dim, lifeless glow. My phone was useless, the screen showing a desperate no-signal message. I was truly cut off from the world, alone in this nightmare. The blood continued to drip, thick and relentless, pooling at the base of the windows and casting everything in a sickening red hue. My mind raced, grappling with the impossibility of it all. Blood rain, locked doors, eerie laughter. It defied all logic. But there was no denying what I was seeing and hearing. This was real. With mounting panic, I turned to the only option left: breaking out. I scanned the car for anything I could use, my eyes landing on the emergency toolkit beneath the passenger seat. My hands shook as I grabbed a wrench, cold metal offering a fleeting sense of hope. I raised the wrench and smashed it against the driver's side window. The glass didn't shatter as easily as I'd hoped, but I kept at it, each strike fueled by the primal need to escape. Finally, with a resounding crash, the window gave way, shards of glass raining down on me. I didn't care about the cuts on my hands or the blood that now mingled with the rain's crimson flow. I had to get out. Clambering through the broken window, I landed in the mud, cold, wet earth clinging to my clothes. The rain poured down in torrents, mingling with the blood and creating a gruesome scene straight out of a nightmare. I looked around, the flashlight on my phone barely cutting through the oppressive darkness. That's when I heard it again, the laughter. Closer now, more sinister, echoing through the trees. My heart pounded in my chest, and I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to run. I took off, the phone's flashlight bobbing wildly as I sprinted down the dirt road. The rain soaked me to the bone, cold seeping into my very core. The blood continued to fall, each drop a macabre reminder of the horror I was fleeing from. The road seemed to stretch on forever, each step a battle against the mud that tried to pull me back. The laughter followed me, a haunting melody that seemed to grow louder with every passing second. I dared not look back, afraid of what I might see. Instead, I focused on the path ahead, praying that it would lead me to safety. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I couldn't stop. Fear drove me forward, faster than I'd ever run in my life. The rain and blood mixed with my tears, blurring my vision and adding to the disorientation. But I pushed on, driven by a primal instinct to survive. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a light ahead. The end of the road, salvation. I stumbled forward, my body on the verge of collapse, but I couldn't stop now, not when I was so close. As I burst out of the forest and onto the main road, the laughter finally faded, replaced by the blessed sound of distant traffic. I collapsed onto the asphalt, gasping for breath, the rain washing away the blood and grime that covered me. I lay there for a moment, staring up at the stormy sky, trying to process what had just happened. The nightmare wasn't over, but for now, I was safe. Or so I hope. I lay there on the cold, wet asphalt, trying to catch my breath, my mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. The rain continued its relentless assault, grim reminder of the horrors I had just escaped. My body ached, every muscle screaming in protest, but I forced myself to sit up, to keep moving. I couldn't afford to stop now. The main road stretched out before me, a beacon of normalcy in the midst of the nightmare. I stumbled to my feet, my legs trembling, and looked around, hoping to see the comforting glow of headlight. But the road was empty, as desolate and unforgiving as the dirt path I had just fled. The rain obscured my vision, turning the world into a blurry, shifting landscape. My phone's battery was dangerously low, the flashlight flickering weakly. I had to find help. The thought of going back into the forest filled me with a primal dread. I shivered, cold seeping into my bones, and started walking along the road, praying for a miracle. As I walked, the laughter echoed in my mind, a haunting memory that refused to fade. Couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, lurking just out of sight. Trees lining the road seemed to whisper secrets, their branches swaying like skeletal hands. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of terror through me. Minutes felt like hours as I trudged through the rain, my clothes heavy and soaked. My mind raced with questions. What had I seen? What was that blood rain and the laughter? Who or what had been tormenting me? There were no answers, only the relentless drive to keep moving. Then, through the curtain of rain, I saw it. A faint light in the distance. My heart leapt with hope, and I quickened my pace, the light growing brighter with each step. It was a house, old and decrepit, but it offered a glimmer of sanctuary in the darkness. I reached the house, my relief tempered by a sense of foreboding. The windows were dark, and the door hung slightly ajar, swaying in the wind. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but I had no other choice. I needed shelter, needed to get out of the rain and figure out my next move. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, floorboards creaking under my weight. The air was stale, thick, the scent of decay. I shone my flashlight around, revealing a dilapidated interior that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Cobwebs draped the corners, and dust motes danced in the beam of light. I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. No response. The house was abandoned, but it offered a refuge, however temporary. I moved through the rooms, my footsteps echoing in the silence, and found a small living room with a decrepit sofa. I collapsed onto it, the exhaustion finally catching up to me. As I sat there, trying to make sense of everything, a strange feeling settled over me, a sense of being watched. I turned, my flashlight sweeping the room, but saw nothing, just shadows and dust. But the feeling persisted, crawling sensation at the back of my neck. Then I heard it, faint at first but unmistakable, a whisper, just beyond the edge of hearing. I strained to listen, my heart pounding in my chest. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, but I realized it wasn't a single voice, but many, overlapping and intertwined. Fear gripped me as the whispers filled the room, a chorus of tormented souls. I tried to stand, but my legs refused to cooperate, paralyzed by terror. The voices were all around me now, a cacophony of despair and rage, closing in. And then, amidst the chaos, one voice rose above the rest, clear and chilling. You shouldn't have come here. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. The whispers turned to screams, and I felt a cold hand grasp my shoulder. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. I was not alone. The cold hand on my shoulder sent a shockwave of terror through my body, every nerve on fire. I wanted to scream, to run. My body was frozen in place. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices swelling to a deafening roar. I could feel the presence of something dark and malevolent, its icy breath on my neck. Summoning every ounce of willpower, I broke free from the paralyzing fear and bolted from the sofa. Blind in the darkness, I stumbled through the house, my hands outstretched, groping for any sense of direction. The whispers followed me, echoing through the halls, their sinister tones filling me with dread. I found the front door and yanked it open, the rain and wind rushing in like an unholy gale. Without a second thought, I plunged back into the storm, blood rain mingling with the deluge. I didn't care about the mud, the cold, or the exhaustion. All I knew was that I had to get as far away from that house as possible. I ran down the road, the flashlight of my phone flickering back to life in a last desperate gasp of battery. The laughter, now distant, still echoed in my mind, a cruel reminder of the horrors I had faced. The rain was unrelenting, each drop a needle of icy terror. My legs burned, and my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't stop. The road seemed endless, a tunnel of darkness with no end in sight. But then, as if by some divine intervention, I saw headlights approaching in the distance. My heart soared with hope, and I waved my arms, shouting for help. Car slowed, its headlights illuminating my drenched and bedraggled form. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, rolled down the window and asked if I was okay. I babbled my story, words tumbling out in a frantic rush, desperate to make him understand the urgency. He listened, his face growing pale as I recounted the night's events. When I finished, he shook his head slowly. "You're lucky to be alive," he said, his voice tinged with a mix of fear and disbelief. "That road has a dark history. Many who venture there don't come back." I shivered, his words only adding to the chilling reality of my ordeal. He offered me a ride, and I gratefully climbed into the warmth of his car, my body trembling from the cold and the terror that still clung to me. As we drove away, I glanced back at the road, now just a dark ribbon vanishing into the night. Man drove me to the nearest town. I called a taxi from a small diner. While I waited, the man sat with me, sharing stories of strange occurrences on that road. He spoke of disappearances, of people hearing voices, and of a rain that was not water, blood. His tales, though meant to comfort, only deepened the mystery and horror of what I had experienced. When the taxi arrived, I thanked the man and climbed into the back seat, feeling a semblance of safety for the first time that night. The driver, an older woman with a stern face, eyed me warily as I told her where to go. As we drove, felt the tension slowly leave my body, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. I glanced out the window, watching the rain finally begin to let up, the storm passing as if it had never been. My thoughts wandered back to the house, the blood rain, and the sinister laughter. The memory of the cold hand on my shoulder sent a shiver down my spine. When we reached my home, I paid the driver and stepped out into the damp night. As I walked to my door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence heavier. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me, and collapsed onto my couch, too tired to even change out of my wet clothes. Closed my eyes, hoping for sleep but knowing it wouldn't come easily. The events of the night replayed in my mind, a nightmare on a loop. The voices, the blood, the laughter, they were etched into my memory, permanent scar. As I drifted into a fitful sleep, one thought lingered, chilling and persistent. Some roads are best left untraveled, some shortcuts best left untaken. And some nights, the darkness holds more than just shadows. I survived the night, but I would never be the same. The horror of that road, the malevolent presence in the forest, and the sinister laughter would haunt me forever. Constant reminder that sometimes the worst nightmares are the ones you live through. I should have known better than to take the mountain road that night. The storm was relentless, sheets of rain pounding against my windshield, wipers working overtime just to give me a sliver of visibility. The headlights barely cut through the darkness, illuminating the twisting path ahead. I was driving carefully, my speedometer hovering around 50 kilometers per hour. The road was slick, and one wrong move could send me skidding off the edge. The wind howled through the trees, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. Every now and then, a flash of lightning would illuminate the towering pines, casting long, eerie shadows across the road. That's when I saw it, a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror, approaching fast. Too fast. Before I could react, a red Ford F-Series pickup truck roared past me, its engine growling like a beast. The driver must have been going at least 70 kilometers per hour, maybe more. The truck swerved dangerously close as it overtook me, the whoosh of its passing sending a spray of water across my windshield. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my heart pounding. The recklessness of the driver sent a shiver down my spine. In this weather, on this road, such speed was a death wish. As the truck's taillights disappeared into the stormy night, I muttered a curse under my breath and focused on keeping my car steady. Minutes passed, the rain unrelenting. I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling that the truck had left behind. But then, through the downpour, I noticed something up ahead. Thick black plume of smoke rising into the air. My stomach clenched as I realized it was coming from just around the bend where the truck had vanished. I slowed down, my breath fogging up the windshield. As I rounded the curve, my headlights caught the horrific sight below, a red pickup, flipped over, flames licking its sides. It had skidded off the road and tumbled down the steep embankment, now lying about 300 yards below, engulfed in fire. I pulled over, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone. The scene was nightmarish, fire casting eerie shadows that danced in the darkness. I dialed 911, barely able to get the words out. "There's been an accident. Truck. It's on fire." The operator assured me help was on the way. I couldn't just sit there. I had to see if anyone needed help. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped out into the storm, the rain immediately soaking me to the bone. I slipped and stumbled down the muddy slope, the heat from the flames growing more intense as I got closer. When I reached the wreck, I could see through the shattered windows. There was no one inside. Despite the fire, the truck hadn't exploded, and it was clear enough to see. No bodies, no driver, no passengers, nothing. My mind raced. Could they have been thrown from the vehicle? I searched the area, calling out, but my voice was swallowed by the storm. No one answered. No tracks, no signs of movement. Just the ominous crackling flames and the suffocating darkness. With a heavy heart and a mind full of questions, I made my way back up the slope. The storm continued to rage as if nature itself was in turmoil. I climbed back into my car, drenched and shivering, and drove away from that cursed spot. The image of the burning truck seared into my memory. That night, I barely slept. The encounter haunted me, and little did I know, it was only the beginning of a nightmare that would leave me questioning the very fabric of reality. The next day dawned gray and somber, as if the storm had left a residue of unease in the air. I dragged myself to work, the events of the previous night replaying in my mind like a broken record. The sight of that overturned truck, the absence of any sign of life, it all gnawed at me, constant, nagging dread. During a break, I recounted the incident to my coworkers, hoping for some validation, or at least a semblance of shared concern. But their reactions were far from what I expected. They listened, nodding occasionally, but there was a disconnect, skeptical glint in their eyes. "That's strange," one of them said. "I didn't hear about any accident on the news this morning." "Me neither," another chimed in. "Something like that would definitely make headlines around here." Cold chill settled in my stomach. Didn't make sense. An accident of that magnitude should have been reported, should have had emergency crews swarming the site, should have left traces. But there was nothing. The thought gnawed at me all day, persistent itch I couldn't scratch. By the time I clocked out, the unease had grown into full-blown anxiety. I had to see it for myself. Maybe I had missed something. Maybe there was an explanation. So I decided to take the same route home, back up the mountain road. The storm had passed, leaving the air thick and humid, the road still damp. As I approached the bend where I had seen the wreck, my heart pounded in my chest. I slowed down, eyes scanning the area where the truck had plummeted. But what I saw made my blood run cold. There was nothing. No charred remains of a vehicle, no scorch marks on the ground, no signs of an accident at all. It was as if the night before had been a twisted figment of my imagination. I pulled over, got out of the car, stood at the edge of the embankment, staring down at the spot where the truck had burned. I had seen it. I had felt the heat of the flames, heard the crackle of burning metal. Couldn't have just vanished. My mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. That's when I saw it, etched into a large rock at the bottom of the slope, a message that hadn't been there before. "You could be next. Never come back." The words were carved deep into the stone, rough and jagged, as if done in a frenzy. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The warning was clear, a sinister promise that sent a shiver down my spine. I had never believed in the supernatural, but this was beyond explanation, beyond reason. I hurried back to my car, my heart racing, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The drive home was a blur, my thoughts consumed by the ominous message. I felt eyes on me, unseen but palpable, creeping sensation that followed me all the way home. That night, sleep was a distant memory. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside sent jolts of fear through me. The warning echoed in my mind, a dark mantra that refused to be silenced. What had I stumbled upon? What force was trying to keep me away? The memory of the red pickup, fire, the chilling message, it all became an obsession. I knew one thing for certain: I would never drive that road again. And yet the fear lingered, a shadow that would haunt me, reminding me that some things are better left unexplored. The morning light did little to dispel the shadows that clung to my thoughts. I dragged myself to work, feeling the weight of the previous night's encounter pressing down on me. Carved warning haunted my every step, a grim reminder that something was terribly wrong. I tried to push it aside, focusing on mundane tasks. The mystery gnawed at me. During lunch, I decided to do some digging. Surely someone had to know something. I started with local news websites, scanning for any mention of a crash, but there was nothing. Not a single report of an accident on the mountain road. My frustration grew. I broadened my search, checking social media, local forums, anywhere someone might have posted about the red pickup. Still, nothing. It was as if the crash had never happened. My coworkers' skepticism replayed in my mind, their doubt adding to my unease. Desperation drove me to contact the local police department. I dialed the non-emergency line, my heart racing as I waited for someone to answer. When an officer finally picked up, I described the accident in as much detail as I could. The storm, the speeding truck, wreckage, flames. There was a long pause on the other end. "I'm sorry," the officer said finally, "but we don't have any reports of an accident like that." "Are you sure it was on the mountain road?" "Yes," I insisted. "I saw it with my own eyes." The truck was burning, and then I hesitated, unsure how to explain the disappearance without sounding crazy. "Maybe you should come in," the officer suggested. "We can take your statement in person." The thought of recounting the eerie events face to face was unnerving, but I agreed. That afternoon, I left work early and drove to the police station. The building was stark and unwelcoming, bold contrast to the sweltering heat outside. I was led to a small interview room where the officer I had spoken to met me. I told my story again, sparing no detail. The officer listened intently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back, his fingers steepled. "We'll look into it," he said, "but without any evidence or other witnesses, difficult. Take action." I left the station feeling more alone than ever. My encounter was becoming a ghost story, one that no one else seemed to believe. The drive home was suffused with a heavy silence, the memory of the rock's warning playing over and over in my mind. As I turned onto my street, I felt a chill creep up my spine. Something was wrong. The sense of being watched, which had plagued me since the incident, was stronger now. I glanced around, but nothing seemed out of place. Just my quiet neighborhood, bathed in the golden light of early evening. I entered my house, locking the door behind me with a sense of finality. My sanctuary felt different, the walls pressing in as if the house itself was aware of my fear. I went through my evening routine on autopilot, each task a distraction from the unease gnawing at my mind. Night fell, and with it came the familiar dread. Couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking, waiting. I checked the locks twice before forcing myself to bed, but sleep was elusive. Every noise, every shadow seemed amplified, my imagination conjuring horrors in the darkness. Then, just as I was on the edge of sleep, I heard it. Faint, deliberate tap on my window. My blood turned to ice. I lay there, paralyzed, as the tapping continued, slow and rhythmic. Gathering every ounce of courage, I forced myself to sit up, my heart hammering in my chest. I moved to the window, peering through the curtain. There was nothing there, just the empty yard bathed in moonlight. But the tapping persisted, louder now, as if mocking my fear. I backed away, the warning from the rock echoing in my mind. You could be next. Never come back. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, every light in the house on, my back against the wall. The tapping eventually stopped, but the fear remained. I knew I had to find out what had happened on that mountain road, but the thought terrified me. The mystery had become a nightmare, one that I couldn't escape. Days turned into weeks, but the sense of dread didn't fade. It hung over me like a persistent storm cloud, constant reminder of that chilling night. My every waking moment was haunted by the eerie warning carved into the rock. I tried to go about my life as normally as possible. The feeling of being watched, something lurking just beyond my sight, never left me. Work became a distraction, a place where I could momentarily escape my tormenting thoughts. I continued to ask around about the accident. No one had seen or heard anything. The incident seemed to have slipped from everyone's memory, as if it had never happened. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I decided to take a different route home. I needed to clear my head, to escape the oppressive weight of my own fears. I drove through unfamiliar streets, hoping that by avoiding the mountain road, I might find some semblance of peace. But the sense of unease didn't leave me. The feeling of being followed was still there, a chilling presence that clung to me, even in the daylight. I arrived home, feeling a slight sense of relief, but the house felt colder than usual. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside seemed amplified. As night fell, I tried to relax, but sleep was elusive. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the message on the rock replaying in my mind. You could be next, never come back. It was a haunting promise, one that seemed to grow more menacing with each passing day. I must have eventually dozed off, because I was jolted awake by a noise. My heart raced as I sat up, straining to listen. There it was again, the sound of something tapping at my window. My breath caught in my throat. Tapping was slow and deliberate, exactly like the night of the accident. I forced myself out of bed, my feet feeling leaden as I approached the window. My pulse pounded in my ears, and every instinct told me to run, hide. I pulled back the curtain with trembling hands. The yard outside was bathed in moonlight, and once again there was nothing there, just shadows and the quiet of the night. But then I noticed something new. A figure standing at the edge of the yard, obscured by the darkness. My eyes widened in horror as I saw the shape of a man, his outline barely discernible. Tapping stopped, replaced by a menacing stillness. My heart hammered as I stared at the figure, unable to move. The figure stepped closer, emerging from the shadows, and my blood ran cold. It was the driver of the red pickup, or at least someone who looked like him, drenched, eyes hollow, and a sinister grin on his face. The resemblance was uncanny, the horror palpable. The same eyes that had watched me from the wreck were now staring at me through the window. Desperation clawed at me as I backed away from the window. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and dialed 911. My voice was barely a whisper as I described the figure outside, but the line was met with an unnerving silence. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. The figure outside moved closer, and I could hear the faint, mocking laugh that sent shivers down my spine. The tapping resumed, now louder, more insistent. It felt as if the walls themselves were closing in, suffocating me in my own terror. I scrambled to find a flashlight, my hands fumbling in the pitch black. I pointed it toward the window, and for a split second I saw the figure's face clearly, a gaunt, spectral visage that seemed to leer with malevolent delight. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the tapping stopped. The figure vanished into the darkness, leaving me alone with my fear. The lights flickered back on, but the figure was gone. I was left with a lingering dread, clawed at my sanity. I spent the rest of the night on high alert, every sound magnified, every shadow a potential threat. The terror of that night never left me, and the warning on the rock remained a haunting reminder of the dangers that lurked just out of sight. I never drove that mountain road again, and I avoided the area altogether. To this day, I can't shake the feeling of being watched, the shadow of that grim warning hanging over me. The fear has become a part of my life, a constant companion that reminds me of the unknown and the sinister forces that lie hidden in the dark corners of our world. I was driving home on one of those nights where everything seems to conspire against you. The rain was relentless, each drop hammering against my windshield like tiny fists. The wipers struggled to keep up, smearing the water more than clearing it. It was just past midnight, and the road was deserted. 2 lanes stretched out before me, swallowed by the darkness, and the speed limit signs were barely visible through the downpour. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The usual comforting hum of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the wipers did little to calm my nerves. Felt like the night itself was alive, watching, waiting. The headlights cut through the darkness, but it was like driving through a tunnel, the world outside the beams lost in the inky black. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind kept wandering. Every shadow seemed to shift and move. Every gust of wind carried whispers that I couldn't quite make out. I told myself it was just the rain and my imagination playing tricks on me. The pit in my stomach only grew deeper. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 12:15 a.m. Just a little longer, I told myself. Just a few more miles, and I'd be home, dry and safe. But the unease gnawed at me, a persistent dread that I couldn't shake. The kind that makes your skin crawl and your heart race for no reason at all. The road stretched on, and I felt more alone with every passing minute. The radio was off, leaving only the sound of the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. It was then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Figure, barely visible, moving against the flow of traffic. A man on a bicycle, soaked to the bone, pedaling furiously against the storm. My heart skipped a beat. What was he doing out here, in this weather, on this deserted road? I shook my head, trying to focus. But the feeling of something terribly wrong tightened its grip on me, and I knew deep down that this night was far from over. I couldn't take my eyes off the cyclist. He was just a dark silhouette against the rain, but something about him was deeply unsettling. He rode against the traffic, his figure flickering in and out of the shadows cast by my headlights. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears louder than the relentless rain. I slowed down, trying to gauge his movements, but he seemed erratic, almost like he was being pushed by some unseen force. My palms were slick with sweat, making it harder to keep a firm grip on the steering wheel. As I approached, I honked the horn, hoping to alert him, but he didn't react. He just kept pedaling, head down, water streaming off him in sheets. Panic surged through me. I tried to swerve to the left, but just as I did, the cyclist suddenly veered in the same direction. It was like he was deliberately trying to collide with my car. The world slowed down, every second stretching into an eternity as I desperately twisted the wheel, trying to avoid him. But it was too late. The impact was a sickening thud that reverberated through the car. The cyclist's body slammed into the hood, then the windshield, his face a ghostly blur against the glass. The crack of the windshield spider-webbed out from the point of contact, and for a split second, I saw his eyes, wide, terrified and accusing. I skidded to a halt, the car fishtailing on the wet road before finally coming to a stop. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I forced myself to look, but I already knew. The cyclist lay motionless, half sprawled across the hood, half on the asphalt. Blood mixed with rainwater, creating a gruesome scene that made my stomach churn. I fumbled for my phone, my hands trembling uncontrollably as I dialed 911. The operator's voice was a distant, barely comprehensible murmur as I stammered out what had happened. My mind raced, 1,000 thoughts colliding at once, but one stood out among the chaos. I had killed him. As I waited for the police, I couldn't tear my eyes away from the lifeless form. The rain continued to pour, washing away the blood, but not the guilt. It was then that I saw it. His body twitched, ever so slightly. My breath caught in my throat. It couldn't be. He was dead. I was sure of it. But the movement continued, more pronounced now. And then, to my utter horror, a ghostly figure began to rise from the crumpled body. It was the cyclist, but not as he had been. His form was translucent, shimmering in the rain, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light. He floated towards me, his expression twisted with anger and pain. "You took my life," he hissed, his voice echoing unnaturally. "Now I will take yours." I was paralyzed, unable to move or even scream. The apparition's cold, spectral hand reached out, and just as it was about to touch me, the blare of sirens pierced the night. The police arrived, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness. The ghostly figure faded. His words lingered, chilling promise of revenge. The officers found me in a state of shock, barely able to speak. They took my statement, their faces grim as they examined the scene. I was allowed to go home, but I knew that I would never truly leave that night behind. The cyclist's vengeful spirit had marked me, and no amount of distance or time could erase the terror that had taken root in my soul. I barely remember driving home that night. My mind was a blur of fear and confusion, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The rain had let up. The darkness seemed thicker, more oppressive. When I finally stumbled through my front door, I felt an overwhelming urge to scrub the night's events from my skin, as if they were a physical stain. Sleep was out of the question. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. Those wide, accusing eyes, the ghostly figure promising revenge. I sat in the living room, the only light coming from a dim lamp, casting long, ominous shadows that seemed to dance and twist in the corners of my vision. That's when the strange occurrences began. It started subtly, with whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind or my mind playing tricks on me. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, and unmistakably real. They echoed through the empty house, a cacophony of hushed voices speaking words I couldn't understand but felt deep in my bones. One night, as I lay in bed, the whispers crescendoed into a single, chilling phrase. "He will be avenged." I bolted upright, my heart pounding. The room was ice cold, my breath visible in the air. The sense of being watched was overpowering. I scanned the room, but there was nothing, only the oppressive darkness pressing in from all sides. Days turned into weeks, but the haunting didn't relent. Objects in the house began to move on their own. A chair would be out of place, doors would slam shut with no warning, and lights flickered ominously. Each incident chipped away at my sanity, leaving me a paranoid wreck, jumping at every creak and shadow. One evening, as I sat on the couch, trying to lose myself in the flickering light of the television, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. Air around me turned frigid, and I could see my breath again. The television screen flickered, then went black. In the darkness of the blank screen, a figure appeared. His figure, the cyclist's ghostly form, materialized, more solid and terrifying than before. His eyes bore into mine, filled with a seething hatred that chilled me to the core. He floated towards me, and I was rooted to the spot, unable to move or even breathe. "You took my life," he whispered, his voice a cold wind that cut through me. "And now, I will take yours." The room around me seemed to dissolve, and all that existed was his vengeful presence. His hand reached out, translucent fingers brushing against my skin. It felt like ice, burning and numbing at the same time. Panic surged through me. I finally found my voice, screaming in pure, primal terror. And then, as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. The room snapped back into focus, the warmth slowly returning. But the sense of dread remained, heavier than ever. I knew then that this wasn't over. He would return again and again, until he had his revenge. I was living a waking nightmare, haunted by a spirit I couldn't escape. Every moment was a torment, every shadow a reminder of the ghostly cyclist who had marked me for death. The fear was unending, a constant companion in the dark, silent hours of the night. And as much as I tried to convince myself otherwise, I knew the truth. He was always there, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The days following that encounter blurred together in a haze of dread. I barely ate, barely slept, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the cyclist's ghostly figure looming in the shadows. The whispers persisted, gnawing at my sanity, each one a reminder of the vengeful spirit lurking just out of sight. I tried to go about my life, but normalcy was a distant memory. At work, my colleagues noticed my haggard appearance, dark circles under my eyes, the jumpiness at every sudden sound. I made excuses, blaming it on stress and lack of sleep, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. One evening, after another restless day, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront whatever was haunting me, or I would lose my mind. I scoured the internet for answers, finding forums and articles about hauntings and vengeful spirits. Most of it seemed like nonsense, but I was desperate, willing to try anything. Armed with sage and a shaky resolve, I began a ritual I had read about, hoping to cleanse my home of the restless spirit. As I walked through the house, the acrid smoke of the burning sage trailing behind me, I chanted the words I had memorized. The air grew heavy, the atmosphere thick with tension. I reached the living room, where the haunting had begun. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the whispers swelled into a cacophony of anger and despair. I forced myself to keep going, repeating the incantation louder, more desperately. The shadows seemed to close in, darkness more tangible than ever. And then he appeared. The ghost of the cyclist emerged from the shadows, his form more solid, more menacing than before. His eyes glowed with an unholy light, and his mouth twisted into a snarl. The room seemed to pulsate with his anger, and I felt a primal fear seize my heart. "You think this will save you?" he hissed, his voice a bone-chilling whisper. "You took my life, and nothing can change that." I stood my ground, the sage trembling in my hand. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. "It was an accident. I never meant to hurt you." His form wavered, the anger in his eyes flickering for a moment. But then the malevolence returned, stronger than ever. "Sorry won't bring me back. Sorry won't give me justice." He lunged at me, and I fell back, the sage slipping from my grasp. His cold, spectral hands wrapped around my throat, squeezing the life out of me. My vision darkened, and I felt myself slipping away, the world fading into a void of terror and regret. Just as I thought it was the end, a blinding light filled the room. The grip on my throat loosened, and the cyclist's ghost shrieked in agony. The light grew brighter, enveloping the room, and I felt a warmth that pushed back the cold dread. The ghost dissipated, his form dissolving into nothingness. I gasped for air, collapsing to the floor, the light fading into a soft glow. The room was silent. The oppressive darkness lifted. I lay there for what felt like hours, too exhausted and shaken to move. In the days that followed, the haunting ceased. The whispers were gone, the shadows no longer seemed alive with menace. But the scars remained, both physical and mental. Couldn't forget what had happened, the terror I had endured. The cyclist's ghost had left a mark on my soul, would never fully heal. I knew I had been given a second chance, a reprieve from the vengeance of a restless spirit. But every time I drove down a dark, rainy road, I felt a shiver of fear, a reminder of that fateful night. And in the quiet moments when the world was still, I sometimes heard a whisper, a faint echo of a promise made in the depths of despair, a reminder that some ghosts never truly leave, and some debts can never be fully repaid. If you liked this real and horrifying story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Check out this other real horror story appearing in the video. Thanks for watching.